This is the ridiculous plan. Today, July 30th, by August 7th, when I show up to do that workshop, I am going to show them a slide deck of methodology that shows those 3 projects and the fact that they could be done in a week by a dude working full time. We will see if I pull it off, but this is definitely going in the vlog regardless. What's up? MVA Joshua here. This is the MVA vlog, episode 95. In this episode, we're going to get deep into portfolios. What stuff do you need to make for your portfolio? What is a way of making new stuff for your portfolio with a minimum amount of labor and effort? And what is like a step-by-step methodology for making that work? I also talk about what I like to see in terms of portfolio presentations, and then as a little kind of bonus, talk about how do you do the most minimum amount of work to figure out if a concept that could be really involved, to figure out if it'll work. Hope you enjoy it. If you have any questions or comments, make sure you leave them. And if you are not subscribed, do it. Today it is Tuesday, July 29th, and I am teaching a workshop on Wednesday, August 7th. So just over a week from today. And what I'm going to do in this next week is I'm going to develop at least two, but hopefully 3 new portfolio pieces. They're not going to be brand new from scratch portfolio pieces, but they are going to take work that's in the portfolio and render it in a new, better light. And the reason that I'm going to do this is that the workshop that I am teaching is called Portfolio Expansion for Graphic Designers. And it's about this really basic problem, which is that it's really hard to make up your own projects. And a lot of the times in portfolio reviews I've seen, a common bit of feedback is that there is good work here, but that it hasn't reached its full resolution in terms of application. I talked about this a couple weeks ago, the idea of low-hanging fruit in your portfolio and width versus depth. In this workshop, we're going to go through that process of identifying stuff and how you decide what to move forward with. But to show that it's doable and reasonable, I'm going to apply it to our portfolio strategically. The kinds of projects that we're going to apply it to in the MVA portfolio is going to be music-related projects, because we want to do more music-related work, and we haven't done really anything with width or depth in years. What we're going to look for then is projects in our portfolio that have the potential to be more than they currently are. The things that I've identified in our portfolio that I currently dig and think they have room for expansion are the Josh Harmony cover and this cover for this rapper Delve. The model in all of these will be the same. So it's like, okay, I got the Josh Harmony cover. How do I add depth to it? Well, it could be a 12-inch EP pretty easily. That adds some depth. And now we add width. So one way to do that is to add width that would also add depth, so we can make a tape. And then the next thing is to go and look at, like, okay, what are other products that would make sense? And you design merch, right? And then there's other stuff that helps promote the record. So it could be like Spotify single covers, or YouTube lyric video, animated Instagram posts, stuff like that. And I would just brainstorm a list of kind of everything I could think about. In terms of what to do, the biggest thing is to cover off on what's obvious. And by that I mean, if you treat this as a real world project with a budget, what things do you feel like absolutely need to be done? Then you do those. The other thing is, you do not need to get into this mindset that you have to do everything before you show it. You can attack one piece of it. You can just do the packaging. If you're interested in motion graphics, do the lyric video or whatever that might be. That's loud. And then the last one, if there's time, is not going to be music related. It's going to go towards one of the other sectors that we care about, which is art marketing. And we're going to take the resonating bodies graphic, which was originally issued as a mailer and a poster. And then we might have done like an exhibition wall. But I'm going to tear apart that visual language and turn it into an actual campaign, because I don't think we really have any marketing campaign type work in our portfolio.
Let's look at this thing. Okay, first thing, basic portfolio assessment. This would be my methodology for figuring out what you need to make. But before you do this, if you are new or you're a student or you're trying to transition from one kind of career to the next, what I would say before you kind of do anything is take your current portfolio to 2 to 3 people, ideally people that have hired designers. So like not your friend. It doesn't matter how good your friend is. If they've never hired a designer, their opinion is borderline worthless. Like actual people who've hired designers, and get a portfolio review that focuses on low-hanging fruit. The kind of stuff that we're talking about, as well as stuff like, ooh, you can't do 2 hyphens, like that should be an M dash. Like the nerdy stuff that stands out to designers and creative directors. It's essentially the equivalent of a typo in a piece of writing. No one should change their opinion on an article because of a misplaced comma, but yet they do. Everybody notices the things that aren't how they're supposed to be. And when you're getting like your portfolio reviewed, it's the exact same thing. So, well, you guys did like mid-program reviews, right? Did you witness like any unbelievably like people honing in on shit that just doesn't matter? It's like not substantial, but they have to say something. But the other thing is that by talking about the bad kerning or the bad end dash or the whatever weird thing it is, the too much information on a billboard, whatever it might be, it gives their brain a rest because they don't have to talk about the hard part of what do I think about this? Like it's much easier to be like a pattern recognition machine and be like, that violates the pattern. So you want to have somebody review your portfolio with the express purpose of finding all of that crap. That solves so many kind of problems for you later. And then the other thing is, if they find mistakes that you meant to do on purpose, that tells you a very important thing, that when you're presenting your work, you're glossing over things that are actually features. So if somebody goes like, this whole thing, and they start tearing something apart, assuming it's amateur hour, and you're like, no, I did that on purpose. That doesn't tell you don't do that thing. That tells you you did a terrible job explaining this, and this person has been distracted now by the awful area that they think is a mistake, and that is actually a core part of the work. Public service announcement. Okay, so methodology. So 1, establish a goal. Your portfolio is a tool to achieve something, so be clear on what that something is. Here is an example for my studio. We want to design a significant amount of music packaging. What is missing from your portfolio that would make you a natural fit for the situation that you want? We only have one project that I like that's a full package. Everything else is single surface digital covers. So those things are missing both the width and the depth. Wanting to do more packaging is a depth play anyway, but a little square that goes on Spotify, like it doesn't, it's cool, but it doesn't achieve anything. What projects do you currently have that you could leverage to create work that better fits your needs? I don't know. I have demo singles. So we have actually like 5 projects on our website that are music graphics, but only one of them is a full package. So expand one of those projects accordingly. If you're turning one thing into like an identity system, or you want to expand the width on something, you don't have to be a hermit in a cave until it's all done. You can just keep adding to that project over and over again. The fact is, like, if you add 2 things to something and you don't get whatever it was you were after, who knows if adding 5 things was going to help, or if what it was going to really be about was that you need 2 more projects. Essentially, like, don't fire yourself and not give yourself opportunities because you're waiting to be done with these bigger ambitious things. If you've got something solid already, just keep adding to it. Basic kind of project expansion. List out how it can be expanded. The big thing is, what are the public facing or standard elements that you can design? I think this one is really smart because a lot of times people do identity projects and they think about what has traditionally been the identity project. But if you rebrand Comedy Central, no one cares about the business cards. You know what I mean? It's about like the stuff the public sees. The public doesn't see a business card. They see the interstitial graphics, they see the ads, they see how it's represented on the website, a lot of other stuff. It's not to say don't do business cards, but like think about the public facing aspects. And I think when you're making this list, be all inclusive. Like, don't limit yourself to, well, what I want to do is this. You're already there. Just write out that whole list, because there might be some stuff that gets you more out of it that's really easy to execute on, but that looks more impressive than it is. What on the list is the most obvious thing to do? For me, it's going to be the record package and the cassette. Pick a project. What do you have to design in order to make this piece? Now, it sounds like I just said that. The other thing is, if you've never designed the thing that you're about to design, it's probably a good idea to actually research that artifact, that object, that platform, so that you're seeing it a little bit more fully, or make prototypes. Like, if you've never designed a cassette tape package, like, go buy a tape and then make a bunch of paper prototypes and figure out what you can do with it, rather than just take what the Photoshop template says that you can do. I would advocate that you always do something like this, which is break down the conceptual and visual DNA of the piece so that you have a clear understanding of what it's about. It will keep you from being handcuffed by the original intent and just stamping a graphic across a bunch of surfaces, which everyone will see through. That's why you don't want to do that. This is the thing. The concept is a retro handmade design with like a series kind of feel. It's like that type at the top reminds me of like a series of books or something. So I mean, like, if we just look at this thing and we don't talk about visual DNA, it's like, okay, it's a square and a square with some all caps type and a line. But if we like go and go, what's every quality of this? You go like, okay, there's a paper texture, geometric pattern, primary colors, color overlays. The font is called Venus. There's handmade type. There's a letterpress effect, an even border, all caps type, and a rule line. This list helps me if I get stuck and cannot figure out what the hell to do with the back cover because I'm so attached to what the front cover is or was. And then I break that out further into something that's like a very loose brand design identity. So for me, this started out, it's like, okay, like just the song titles, the songs broken out, maybe use the blue from the cover, running across them at like edge to edge, then starting to look at, is the back too boring? Maybe it needs to feel more like the front. So going like top to bottom with lyrics and then color coding them based on the colors in the cover. This is maybe a good example, but the font said Venus, but also said handmade type. So then I started looking at typewriter fonts, because maybe if I hand typewrite this after I do it and then scan that in, it has the same feel as the front, even if it's different. For me, that's really important. Like, other people might be really good at being loose. Like, I'm not good at being loose. I need like a plan, and I need to give myself permission to figure out what to do. So saying handmade type, like, super important for my brain to be like, okay, what are other ways of doing it? And then I started thinking about labels, how to have an interplay between the cover and the labels, and started to look at like getting rid of logos. And then I'm kind of anti-feedback, but what I did do was I took this PDF with 11 versions and showed it to my wife and said, pick one. And then she picked this one, and I was like, okay, cool, that's my favorite too, so that works out well. This project now on our portfolio goes from that square to that thing, which is like, that's not bad for 3 hours worth of work. That's a pretty cool feeling to be like, okay, even if I don't remake it by hand, literally 99% of the world wouldn't care anyway. And I'm gonna show one more because I did two. And this one I really like because the actual graphic, when I initially did it, took 24 minutes and I did 5 versions and then I sent it to the person and said, here you go. 24 minutes worth of labor to leverage. And it was just a little digital cover for a single by an Italian rapper. And I was like, okay, these are some things I could do with that. So visual DNA, black, red, white, gray, that font, all caps, and title case. Breaking it down a little bit more, kind of constructivist. This one was really hard to work with because I was like, in my head, I was like, I love the way this thing looks. And it was so hard to get away from the initial arrangement of the cover. Like I started doing some photographic stuff and playing with this interplay of the label. And I had this idea of like, oh, well, maybe it's a sticker on it. And then something in my head decided, fuck it, just put a hole through the middle and then just run it edge to edge and then make it that the back cover or the front cover would work and that it would always be slightly off. And I like the idea that it's slightly surreal. And then it took this thing, so we put this, like we have like a music graphics section of our website, and this piece will now graduate, at least for the time being, to the front page of the website where like the showcase is, because I quite like it. So it's like in an hour and a half or 2 hours, it went from this thing that I liked, but just kind of sat there to like, oh, this is cool. I wonder if I can do like a cassette tape too. And like now all of a sudden like this bizarre little project that I did for free and set an egg timer to achieve steps up a level in our portfolio. And then this one doesn't go into the execution, but it's about the idea of taking something like a poster and expanding it into an identity system. And this was what I used to show my students, like, this is how I want you to approach this. The goal would be like to design a full campaign for an exhibition, because we never really did that. So the project is this resonating bodies poster, and the stuff we could do is out-of-home advertising, Instagram story, animated posts, print ads, title wall exhibition graphics, exhibition design, a catalog. The concept for this was that all of the participants in this group show had working relationships, and this was illustrated through a symbol system that used shape, color, and pattern to reveal the network, and a key at the bottom allows the reader to decipher the system. What I like about this as an example is that this thing was very much designed only to be this thing. It was not designed to do any other labor for anyone at all. It was just supposed to be, here's the mailer, and here's the weird idea that I had. The visual DNA, which is different weights of Helvetica, how is it typeset, 3-column grid, different types of rule lines, different visual attributes, and it broke that down into a basic identity system. And then I think I nerded out on this one a little bit more. We've got the weights of the fonts, that's the color palette, and then the composition. So the margins are 7% of the page width, rounded down to the nearest eighth, 3-column grid. The gutter is 4.5% of the page width, rounded up to the nearest eighth. So apparently I really was like, this thing better be true to the poster. Composition, content should begin at top left and be sequenced by groupings of most important to least. So if I gave you a content, you could make stuff for this show. But I also think it's interesting because it's like, that concept is so tied into this very specific thing. But if I just let go of my ego and my own intent, well, it's about the working relationships. And I go, well, no, the mailer is about the working relationships. And when there's the room to show that, that will show up. But a billboard can't be about that because you can't read the key. So for context, you could actually sit there with the mailer had you gotten it and figure out how each artist knew each other and where they had worked together. And I kind of figure if this piece can be like deconstructed and turned into an identity system of some kind, then probably most things can, because this thing is really nerdy and specific. After doing that presentation, we did a little bit of Q&A, and one of the questions that I got was, what do people want to see in terms of formats when you're doing a portfolio review? I can tell you a couple of my preferences. One, I would love it if everyone in the world, when they showed up, actually had 2 copies of virtually the same thing. One that was meant to be presented to me, that made it difficult for me to get distracted and start reading all the captions. and one that was meant for me to take away in case I didn't have time. Instead of what everyone has is one. And like what I want to see when I'm looking at the thing is like, if I'm taking it, I want context. Like I want to know, what's this project about? What roles did you play? Like I want the details to point out why you did certain things. Not to like an obsessive extent, but just to the extent that like, I want to know how your brain designs things. But one of the dangers of that is when you're in a portfolio review with someone and they're showing you stuff and you're too busy reading all that same information, and it kind of screws up their control of things. You could probably make an argument pretty easily that that's the very same crime I was just guilty of for the last like 28 pages of like telling you the exact same thing that was on the slide. Luckily the slides are short, right? Like everyone sat through a presentation with a bunch of type on it, and then the person read all the type. But I think it's the same thing for a portfolio. So that would be like one thing that I would think about. But I think the biggest thing is just the idea of that it come across that like, I mean, it's like stupid because it's like basic design stuff, right? Like you want some drama. You want like a break between certain things. Like you don't want to see, doesn't matter how many pages, you don't want to see the same page every page, but you want to see like the thinking of like pacing and rhythm and stuff that can come through. And I want to see that stuff. And I have like a bias towards book design and whatnot. When I'm like flipping through a portfolio, that stuff is probably really informing how I think about all of that stuff. But on the other hand, like I'm just as cool looking at actual objects and artifacts. And then I think the question becomes like, if you have real stuff and then you have stuff that you can't show for real, how do you show that stuff in a way where it doesn't just suddenly become like, oh, the most ambitious thing in the portfolio is an Epson print on foam core. You just showed me like a bunch of packaging and it's super cool. And then all of a sudden it's like, there's a retail environment and the presentation just like jumped off a cliff at that point because it's like, it's not as cool as the real stuff, even though it's ostensibly way cooler than the real stuff. Like, I don't know, those are the kinds of things that I think about. A thing that I used to do as a student and probably well into my professional career was I put too much time and effort into concepts that didn't work, but I had to sort of stick with them because I was too deep into it. This next segment goes into what I've learned in the last, say, 5 years or so that has changed that around so that I can figure out how do you test an idea and figure out if it can work. In episode 86, Bad Habits, Good Hierarchy, I talked about this idea of overwrought concepts that make things more difficult than they need to be, and putting yourself through these sort of physical hurdles. And something I was just doing a moment ago made me reflect on the idea of, well, what if there's a reason to be doing the thing that you're doing? How do you do it in a way that's not asinine or sort of out of control? What sparked this is at the moment I'm working on expanding the Josh Harmony record that you heard about earlier in this episode. And I'm working on the lyrics. The original artwork was press type or letraset of the typeface Venus. And the way that I'm doing it is just typesetting the Venus, also doing versions with a typewriter, the font, getting it roughly into place, knowing that there'll be some adjustment from the comp that I'm making in InDesign to the actual thing if I do indeed go this route. And so I'm reflecting on how I would have done this back in the day. So I've got like 1, 2, 3, 4, probably 5 versions of how to treat the lyrics. There's different types of columns. There's one solid block of type with like paragraph marks. I'm trying to think of other stuff. The way I would have done this same project before is that I would have intellectually sort of forced myself to pick one without testing it, typeset the whole thing, and then if I didn't like it, I'd be reworking it probably in a Photoshop file, like as a bitmap file. I'd be moving it around.
this intensely laborious process rather than being reasonable and test the thing, get it mostly there, then go through that process of making it by hand. There's a project on our website that is a poster for an exhibition called RUR. And the primary graphic in that is this kind of digital looking, like Jackson Pollock almost, like kind of all over patterns with lots of dots. The concept behind the poster was derived from the exhibition, which in large part was the idea of artists who show their own hand in their work. So one of the lines of inquiry was, could I show the production of the poster within the poster? Like, could I show the hand of the artist within it? In general, that deck is about half the concepts are these very labor-intensive concepts that would potentially be unpredictable in how they would execute. And the one that we did end up using is based on, it's derived from click tracking software. So that rectangle that you're seeing in the poster is my desktop, and all those circles and dots indicate me working on that project over the course of a month or something. A little cool aside, the version that's on the screen printed poster versus the version that's on the flyer are slightly different because the screen printed poster was done later, therefore more work was done. So basically I would record every session that I worked on it with this click tracking software, and then I composited every session to make the image that you see. So revealing the hand of the designer in some way. Cool ideas aside, because I'm pretty stoked on that idea. When I came up with the idea, I was really worried about whether it would work out. And this is where we get into this idea of laborious concepts and their potential downside. Earlier in my career, like say when I was a student, the way I would have done this project is I would have had that idea somehow. The reality is I wouldn't have had that idea, but let's say I did have that idea. And then I would devote myself towards it. Almost certainly what would have happened is that I would have been bugging my programmer friends to constantly give me pointers on how to build the little app that would do the thing that I needed to do. I can guarantee that I would have gotten like a sort of working version after weeks. And the reality is that at the last minute, I would have to abandon it because it wasn't working and I would have to do something else. I'd be entirely reliant on doing it. And I guarantee it would have been the only idea that I had. When I did this I think it was a 2013 poster, the way that it worked was I had lots of ideas. I had that idea. I thought it was super cool. So the first thing that I did was try to do a beta test of it by finding a click tracking software somewhere and then run it for 20 minutes or something to see if it would work. If I couldn't find one, I would have just killed the idea. It wouldn't have been in my mind for another moment because the design presentation was in a day or two. So I didn't really have time to be like, hey, I got this idea. I'm not sure if it's gonna work or anything. Instead, it was like, I got a bunch of ideas. Here's one, and here's a beta test of it, and now I know that it will work. As always, I think it's fine that people go down whatever route they need to go down on their own projects. So if the way that you have to do a project is you come up with an idea like that, and then consequences be damned, you just run at it, good for you. For me, it just routinely ended in compromise, disappointment, and ongoing anxiety. There's two sources I need to credit for getting me in this mode of testing things out. One was 37 Signals, now Basecamp's book, Getting Real, which is actually from 2004 or 5, but I probably read it in 2011. And that's a design book that matters to me pretty much more than any other. And that's really just a book about building and deploying software and running a company. It was hugely influential. The other one is Ryan Holiday's book, Growth Hacker Marketing, and maybe interviews he was doing around that time. Both of those books are about the idea of not wasting time, energy, attention, or money on things that might not work out and that you may not be able to salvage if you continue down that road, and closing the gap between an idea and its reality. The really key takeaway, there's two of them. One is, in 37 signal speak, abstraction. That any idea that you have for a project is this abstraction. It's not a real thing. This is why you can discuss an idea in a meeting, but it doesn't matter until you've made it. In growth hacker marketing, there's the idea of the minimum viable product. And this was an idea that infected my design process quite heavily, which was the idea of figuring out how much of the work you had to show to have comfort that it would work. And essentially it's the same idea. You're trying to close the gap between that abstraction and the final execution. I think that's a super important thing. It's a really key part of how I teach now, and it wasn't before. But it's this idea of generate lots of ideas, and then you try to find ways to test them to see if they're going to work.
One thing that you said here was that you felt like you needed more big jobs to showcase. If you decide you want to go into agencies, like you need those expansive projects because they operate in an expansive, almost non-reality based world. Obviously they have to make stuff and it needs to be real. The amount of stuff that has to go into a typical like execution can be so wide ranging and all over the place. They want to make sure that you talk their language, like that you understand like that idea of imagining all the different ways that something could play out. And so that's kind of what I latched onto. So some stuff that stood out to me. And so this is one thing kind of for everybody to think about is like a lot of times you have these cool little projects that are real, but they're super little. The thing to remember is that like the real projects, what is great about them is they demonstrate that you have actually done something and you know how to do it. So whether it's a web development project or even just like modifying a Squarespace site, like that stuff is important because you're like, I can do this for you and I know how to do it. But the problem with like those projects is they're entirely based in reality. And reality for our like little clients is boring as shit and not exciting to anyone. Like unless you're the most amazing like visual designer, reality can be like a very kind of boring place to be operating.